ARE Podcast, episode number 28.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. ARE Podcast, where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host, David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the ARE Podcast. I'm joined once again by our co-host, Eric Corey Freed. Thank you, Eric.
Hey.
And today we're going to be talking about problem solving as a life skill. So we are going to be talking all about the skills that we learned in architecture school during criticisms and feedback and reviews and thesis reviews. All of those are actually life skills that you may not even be aware of yet or understand how really unique our educational process is for us as architects. Even if we move out of the architecture field later on in life, what we learned in architecture school will help us. And we're going to talk all about that today. So, Eric, how do you want to start?
Well, I think if you talk to any architects, especially even if you meet architects out in the world for the first time and you're making friends, we kind of have a common history. We're almost like Vietnam vets in a way, and then we all have these war stories about architecture school, and especially around the crit process or the critique process. And every time I meet an architect, inevitably we eventually end up talking about architecture school, the long hours, the lack of sleep, and then just being shredded in a crit. And it doesn't seem to matter where they went to school in the world, you know?
It's the same, yeah.
Yeah, I could be in North Dakota, and I went to school in Philadelphia, and like suddenly we have this common bond.
It's a brotherhood.
It is a brotherhood, almost like a weird fraternity of abuse, and you know. But the crit process itself, I really enjoyed at the time. I really maybe I was being too serious, but I really tried to take it to heart and look at how it works and how it's supposed to work, which is that. You know, it's really designed to give us feedback that we wouldn't normally get. And the other day, I had an experience that kind of reminded me of this fact.
And your experience was? Was that the lead-in?
That was the very weak lead-in. But I was at a room full of very, very smart people, PhD types, right? Scientists, right? Just a room full of really smart people. Don't ask me how I got there. I was delivering pizzas for all you know, but I was in this room with very smart people, and there were 9 teams, and we were sharing our individual projects, right?
And by smart people, these are Harvard, MIT.
Yeah,
you're in there. You're in there with PhD students. You're probably the only non-PhD person in there.
Yeah, everybody. It was like it was like a comedy because it was like doctor, doctor, except for me.
And I'll tease it now. Later on, in a few months, we will be able to tell you what you were doing in that room, but we can't. We don't want to.
We don't want to spoil.
We don't want to spoil it now.
But I'm in this room. We're working on these projects that I'm going to be working on over the next year, and there's different teams. I'm working on healthy buildings, for instance. There's another team working on water. There's another team working on cancer, like big ideas, and we're doing these brainstorming exercises for a week. And the very first day, they asked the teams to kind of stand up and present their thinking by the end of the day. And without even thinking about it, I started giving them feedback, right? Team 1 went and presented their thing. And I just started, I wasn't mean. I didn't tear into them or anything. I just started saying, have you looked at this? Have you thought about this? Because it became second nature. It was we were doing a crit process. That's what it felt like. It felt like an architectural jury and all of these smart people in the room. And I just started giving feedback. And as they kept going around the room, I kept giving feedback until by the time it reached team 5 or 6, they would speak and everybody in the room would look at them and they would stop and everybody's heads would turn and look at me, awaiting me to speak up.
Waiting for the grand one. What are you going to say? But like in an architectural crit, like where you're looking at the head crit guy,
Yeah, but I was the only architect in the room.
Right.
And if I started, my first thought was I was embarrassed because I thought, well, I don't want to dominate the conversation, and I said that out loud, and they're like, no, we want your feedback. The interesting part was afterwards, I'm talking to a PhD biologist, right? She's got 5 degrees. She's a genius. And she said, I've never been critiqued before.
Right.
I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I've been graded. I submit papers and they grade them, but I've never been critiqued where I have to stand up in front of a room and defend my ideas. And I said, what'd you think? What, did you like it? And she said, I loved it. I can't believe that I'm this old, and it just never happened to me before. And then we started talking about this idea that in architecture school, that's all you do. You have to stand up and defend your ideas because it prepares you for life.
And that's what when we were talking about that after your experience with this, on the phone. And I was like, we got to talk about this on a podcast. But it's also, I don't think we realize until later in life and we're older, how valuable our training in architecture school is in terms of problem solving. And like you were saying, to these other different teams, you were just asking questions that were just coming off the top of your head. They just naturally came to you because we're trained like that in architecture school. And as we move in on our careers, we're problem solvers. And a lot of other professions, it's not quite like that. Like you said, this biologist with a PhD had never been critiqued before. It's fascinating.
And they're studying cancer research and how to improve cancer research. What do I know about it? I don't know anything about it, right? But just the basic set of problem solving skills of wanting to give them critiques, and then they saved me for last, right? Which I don't know if it was a coincidence or because they thought I was a smartass, but I went last. But my whole life I've been standing up in front of a room presenting my ideas. So I presented what our team had worked on, and it also then prepared. When I stood up, I came prepared with what the possible objections would be, what the possible thinkings would be. It even shaped my narrative as I'm presenting the ideas because I'm telling it in a story of here's what we first thought and here's what we ruled out, because I've been trained since architecture school to do that, because I know if I don't mention the ideas that we rejected, some juror would pick it up and destroy us, right?
Exactly.
So they even got to see both sides of it. They got to see me critique them, and then they critiqued me, but they got to see that it was unfair. It was like I was on the debate team and they weren't. I felt like I had an unfair advantage in this room of geniuses. That's really what it was, and I think that's what's fascinating about all of this is you did have an unfair advantage, and you were with geniuses, PhDs. I mean, people who academia is their life, but haven't had this experience of even one architectural crit. And we've gone through dozens in our architectural career, and we do it in the real world too. It's a little different, but it's the same kind of process. Another thing that was fascinating that you told me with your own team, when you presented them something and you were ready to rattle off 12 ideas immediately came to your head, and what was their reaction? So I was trying to get the team excited, and I wanted them to. I said, okay, let's just take a few minutes and just brainstorm ideas. So we're working on healthy buildings, right? And so off the top of my head, I said, yeah, we could have a pillow that affects your dreams and improves your dream, gives off gobble waves or whatever. We could have a doorway that as you walk through it zaps the germs on your body. We could have a floor that calluses as you walk on it, so instead of wearing out, it becomes stronger. We could have self-healing walls that when you take a picture out, it heals. We could have a toilet seat that wipes your butt for you. We could have anything we want, right? And I usually always end on a funny one. And I'm like, now you guys go. And they said, well, we need to think about it. I said, no, go, just go, riff. And they weren't biting. They said they wanted time to process and think and present, because they wanted to present strong, good ideas, which is I think a normal human trait. Well, I think their brains going through
PhD programs, again, these are MIT, Harvard PhD students, they're wired to research and be very analytical. So they want to have their information kind of before they present an idea, basically. Like they want to have all their ducks in a row. They're not wired to just have that free flow creative ideas like in architecture school. That's kind of what we do. And again, it's just fascinating that these bright minds, really couldn't or had trouble just riffing on just throwing ideas out.
I don't know if they had trouble as much as they didn't want to. They wanted to make sure the ideas were really well fleshed out and well formed. Whereas I was thinking of it as trace. I was thinking of it as, we'll sketch this. How's this? Okay, what about this? What about this? And just crumpling up. And so I was just doing the verbal version of that, which my architects and friends and I, we do all the time, right? We do it with everything.
So you were thinking they had ideas. They were just a little nervous to share them. They were nervous to embrace the process and just share them freely.
Yeah, and part of that might come with age. I mean, they were young. They're not old like you and me.
Right. It's just fascinating because if you, not just because you're young. Because if this was an architecture studio, I mean, people would just be throwing out ideas.
Right.
It's fascinating.
But remember, I remember first year architecture school. I remember our first crit coming out. I remember it pretty vividly. I can smell the room still. I can, and the older students had already kind of been tormenting us, like, "Oh, you're having your first crit. Oh, you're gonna love it, right? You're gonna get ripped to shreds." And we didn't know what to expect, and they just kind of thrust you into the fire. They don't give you a class on how to defend your ideas. They just say, "Here, you got 5 minutes. Go present. Tell us what you did," and then they rip you apart. And then each year you get better and better at it. And by fifth year, because I went to a 5-year deal, by fifth year, I thought I was really good at it. I mean, I didn't realize the 25 years that would come after that, but at that point in my life, I think my thinking was I was so improved from first year, where I was nervous and shaky and they had to pull information out of me. By fifth year, I was laying out a story with my goal being that they wouldn't even have any questions, that I would have demonstrated that I thought this through.
Right, which comes to mind is, I'm sure all of us know or can remember that one person who you get to fifth year and they can't present, they can't draw, they can't, and you're just thinking like, how did they get this far? Everybody's got that one person. Or they would just show some idea that's like not developed and they would just talk about it incessantly, but like, hardly any drawings were on the board,
Yeah, or, my freshman year was 300 students, and by the time we got to thesis year and fifth year, it was 30.
Exactly.
So that means 9 out of 10 dropped out or went on to other things. But of those 30, there were a couple. I mean, I love them as brothers, but there's a couple that, I didn't know what they were doing there. But they,
and we all have memories of, I can't remember if I don't, at least I'm not emotionally scarred by any crit that I had. I'm sure I've had, some bad ones, but nothing that sort of emotionally scarred me. But I just do remember the feeling of sitting there in the room watching one of your classmates just go through a horrible review just because they didn't put up the work, they didn't think about it, and it's like cringeworthy, and you just feel bad for them. Even if you don't like them, like you feel bad for them because you wouldn't wish that. You wouldn't wish a bad crit on your worst enemy.
Right, yeah. And so I remember one, and I won't say their name, but they got a comment, and the juror, who was being a little aggressive, said, "You're wasting your parents' money. You should just pack it up and go home now." Said that to my buddy, and we're standing in the back of because the idea was you're standing in front of the board presenting, then there's a row of chairs and there's 5 jurors, and then behind that is your professor and maybe a few of the others, and then the rest of us standing kind of in the back wall, just being flies on the wall, listening. And you hear that, and we all wanted to groan out loud. We all wanted to go, ooh.
Right.
But we're also thinking, well, gosh, I haven't presented yet. That mean juror is probably going to do the same to me.
Right. Yeah, and I've never understood those types. We've all had them in juries. I've never understood sort of that. I guess I'd call it negative criticism. It's always positive criticism. I think is what is most valuable. But so let's take this, and that's why we wanted to talk about your experience, which you just had recently with these different teams and stuff, because we want to show how valuable the problem solving that we learned in architecture school, how it sets us up for life. And we may not even realize it yet. But, you and I have had, some experience as employers and employees and working with clients and all that stuff. So we can step back and look at the bigger picture. So even if, we complete architecture school and for whatever reason we don't want to do the AREs, or we just don't feel like, a licensed architect is our path, which is, totally fine. Of course, we want everyone to get licensed. But it doesn't mean we just throw away everything we learned in architecture school. And what we learned at architecture school and our education, architecture is the mother of all arts. So we can do a lot of different things outside of architecture, whether production design or wherever we go, but always using the skills that we learned and the criticisms and stuff that we learned in architecture school will help us in life.
Absolutely. I think it's a great just general education track in order to just prepare you for, a lot of people say, oh, you should go to law school if you want that. But lawyers argue. We don't argue, we convince. It's a little different, right? And frankly, the crit process made me a better designer. Knowing that I'd have to stand up and defend this piece of crap that I just drew, it made me have to work harder at it. It made us better professionals. Well,
it's interesting you just mentioned lawyers, because they're probably, I guess med school is pretty intense too. So let's say, med school and lawyer school and architecture school, those are probably the three most intensive professional program training. Of course, the other two are paid way more than we are when we get out. But it's interesting about lawyers, they're not problem solvers. We are the ones who are, even doctors to a certain extent aren't necessarily problem solvers. Some of the big ones are trying to, solve these major problems. But we're the ones who are problem solvers, and it's through those skills that we've learned in architecture school that we take outside of that to solve problems, and they may not be related to architecture.
Right. Yeah, I in the sustainability world, there's a lot of people that majored in architecture, never worked in it, but moved right into sustainability, and they're applying those same problem-solving skills to the environmental impact of the building. They're, and architecture gave them, of course, a great kind of foundational knowledge to talk about buildings in a way, but they don't need to know about waterproofing, and detailing in order to be good at sustainability.
No, I was just thinking it's almost like, with this group and these 9 teams that you were recently with. And so how many total were there? Of 50?
People?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 60, 65 people in the room.
So let's say you had an observer who observed you guys over the 2 days, and they were told there's one architect in the room, and they got to pick the architect out. I imagine it would have been pretty obvious that you were the architect just because you were just the problem-solving skills you were showing naturally, like not even trying.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I was wearing all black and thick-frame glasses either. So, I was dressed normally.
Right, you would have fit right in.
But it also kind of explains why architects can be perceived as arrogant at times, because we are so willing to start critiquing ideas in the hopes of making, in our mind, we're trying to make you better.
Yeah, and I think that actually goes back to what I was just mentioning earlier, is the type of criticism you give, whether it's negative criticism just because you want to feel holier than thou, or if it's real positive criticism, or asking the questions not to embarrass somebody, but to legitimately help them out, help them make a better project or a better product or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, I think we all probably have crit horror stories. We all have memories of a juror who was a bit of a sadist and was in a bad mood and was particularly harsh. But those are the exceptions, not the rule. Generally, my experience with all the crits is that even if there is one mean one, the others kind of balance that person out, and so you get a fairly nice body of criticism, especially when they agree.
Yeah, it's nice when they agree. It's nice when you put the work in. You'll get good criticism, and you're not going to get all 5 jurors, raking you through the coals. Maybe you get 4, and then you get the one juror who feels sorry for you, so they don't. But that's only if you really didn't do the work at that point. But usually you're not going to get raked through the coals too bad.
But doesn't it also teach us, if we know we're going to stand up in front and talk about our concept, and that the concept was based on this section, and then not draw a section, we know that we would get ripped to shreds. We know that the first comment would be, well, you keep talking about this section, but you didn't bother to draw one. Why didn't you? So we start to anticipate the presentation. We start to anticipate our needs. And doesn't this really parallel what we do in life every day, in our firms, right? Where we know we're going to be presenting to clients. We know we're going to be telling them this story. So I'm going to be preparing drawing, sketches, diagrams for each of those parts.
That's exactly it. And that was one of my motivations, in architecture school. I wouldn't say I was like a great, student. I was very good, but I went to the BAC working, 40 plus hours a week. But that was always one of my things. Like, I knew I had to get up and present this, and I'm a terrible liar, but if I have my ducks in a row, I'm pretty good. So I couldn't just phone stuff in. Like, I would really have to put the time in, because I don't want to get up there and get embarrassed. I don't want to get up there and be made a fool of. So that was kind of my motivation to just, I'm going to do my work, get it done, so I don't look like an idiot in front of everybody.
So it's very different than writing a paper and handing it in. A paper that probably isn't scoured, it probably isn't read as deeply, as opposed to verbally presenting ideas in front of an audience, where all they have to go by is the drawings behind you and the words you say.
Yeah, it's and as we realize, there's not another school experience quite like that. I mean, I guess, some doctorates, PhD students have to defend their thesis in some way, shape, or form, but I still don't think that's like a architectural crit. No.
And for those of you that are recently graduated and think, oh, that's behind me, I won't have to do a crit anymore. You're wrong. Basically, you're going to spend the rest of your careers doing this in front of clients now, and in front of coworkers who are going to want to hear, okay, what's the pitch? You're going to do it in front of your boss, who's going to say, okay, well then draw this, and they're really on your side, right? They want to see you succeed. So you're going to have to learn how to handle criticism, whether you like it or not.
Well, I think, too, what you were just mentioning is, as you get better at it, you get to anticipate the kinds of questions that you're going to get. And that's what we do as architects in the real world. We anticipate if we're going to present in a public forum, for example, we're going to anticipate the kinds of questions the public will ask about, and we're going to have addressed them, rather than somebody asking a question and then everybody looking at each other. Well, I didn't think of that. Like in architecture school, right?
Right.
But we've talked about this too in other podcasts about being a valuable employee, and that is one of probably the most valuable things you can do is just anticipate. Like, be proactive, anticipate. Like, if you're going to your boss, going into a meeting with your boss, a client asks you a question, if you have the paperwork there, if you have the meeting minutes there, if you have whatever it is there, you make your boss look good, and you're on it. You're anticipating. You're being proactive, and that's going to make you a valuable employee.
Exactly. That being said, we do have 9 tips of how to handle criticism better, if you want to go through them.
Yeah, let's go through those. And our new thing we're going to try and do is a 30-minute podcast. So we got about I think 7 minutes to do that. Yeah. So let's talk about how do we handle criticism. So the first one, which is really interesting and probably the most important one, actually, is just number 1, listening.
Right. You really need to listen. And something that I learned that really helps is to record it or take notes, if only because they see you taking notes. They know that you're listening because you're writing things down. And this is true in meetings. This is true in critiques. This is just true in life. Even if you're never going to use the notes again, I found just taking the notes helps me retain them. I might never look at the sheet again, but they're seeing me take notes.
Right.
And that makes it all the difference.
And by the way, this listening is a life skill that you can use in your marriage, your relationships, business relationships, is when somebody is talking to you, just listen. Don't try and talk over them. Don't start talking as soon as they finish. Listen to what they said, especially in these sort of situations where you are receiving criticism. Don't be so defensive. Just listen. Like you say, record or take notes.
The crit's designed to help you. It's feedback. So use it. Use the feedback. Accept it in. It'll make you a better designer.
Exactly. All right, what do we have for number 2?
Number 2 is to focus on the idea that it's not about you. Don't take it personally. It's not like the jurors are going to stand there and go, ugh, I hate those shoes and I hate that shirt and I hate your face and I hate your hair. And if they do, they're out of line. Let's face it. They're ripping apart your ideas, and it's very easy to intertwine your ideas with you and your ego. It's not about you. Don't take it personally. It's really about the strength in the ideas that you put forth. And I imagine if you're really honest with yourself, you'll say, yeah, I could have worked harder on that. I could have thought that through better. I could have presented it better.
Yeah, that's this is a hard one, and I think this is probably one. I mean, I know I continue, to work on, just in life in general is, a lot of us have egos, so trying to put the ego aside, and it's not a personal attack on you. If they don't like your design, if they don't like your idea, they're not saying they don't like you. They just don't like your idea. And that's okay. The more successful we become, the more ideas we're going to have and the more ideas we're going to throw out to get to the good ideas. What do we have for number 3?
Number 3 is a bit of a tip, which is to repeat back what you just heard. It's a process called active listening. And it demonstrates that they know you were listening to them, and then you get to confirm that you heard it correctly, because sometimes you don't, especially if you're thinking about something they had said before. So what you do is you say, so what I'm hearing you say is I should be developing this more. Is that correct? And be very humble and just ask, repeat it back.
What this does, this goes back to a life skill too. It validates the other person. And in conversations and business meetings, we don't want the other person to feel invalidated. We don't want them to feel like they're not important. For an example, a critique or a juror could say, "I think your hallway is too wide." I could fire back and say, "No, it's not. It's perfect." But then that just invalidated what they just said. So, like you said, okay, you're saying my hallway is too wide, and so that validates their point, and it makes them feel good, and you're also taking in their criticism rather than just being defensive.
Which leads us to kind of number 4, which is perfect, right? They say your hallway's too wide. You don't spend any time thinking about it. You just fire back. No, it's not. Almost as a reaction. Right. So number 4 is to engage, is to ask questions, is where you can say, oh, well, I actually tried looking at a wider hallway because I wanted this, and this, but I found that it created these problems. Remember, you've been working on this project maybe for months. The juror's only seen it for 5 minutes. So you benefit from the thought processes that you've already ruled out. You can say things like, yeah, I was thinking about this other approach. Do you think that would have worked better? Use the knowledge in the room to see if anywhere along the way you've made a bad decision or a poor design choice, and tell them that story. Just because it's not on the board, use the experts to engage them and ask them questions. Not only that, but another real life example, as we like to do here, if you're in a meeting with a client, be open to that. They will help you improve your design, and that's ultimately who you're designing for. But they will help you. So when they do, offer criticism that, hey, the bathroom's too small, or I don't like where you put the master bedroom, don't just say, well, I put it here because this is the best place for it. Engage them and ask them, well, where would they like it? Maybe they want a view of the backyard and not the pool, or who knows, but it's that engaging process, and you'll have happier clients as well if they feel engaged, again, if they feel validated with their questions. Right. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, I thought about it there, but then I figured that it would be more expensive, or I thought you wouldn't like it because of this. But if you do like it, okay, we can do that. You want to be very open. It is a process. And it, the trouble with any critique is that it feels final. And it's not, right? You can continue working on it much out, long after the critique is over.
Here's, I think, one of the biggest problems with the critique. It goes back to, I think, number 2, where you take it personal and it's about you. And maybe Frank Gehry and his crazy buildings he does. I don't know. I think that's a little different. That's a different realm. I think in general, to be a successful architect, we have to pay attention to our clients. We can't just say, I'm designing the building the way I want. It doesn't work like that. You're not going to have very many clients if you're like that.
Exactly. And by the way, Gehry didn't start out that way. He started out designing malls for developers. So, it was only decades later that he was able to push the other stuff.
All right, number 5. What do we have?
Number 5 is to trust in people. Just assume that people are good, that they have good intentions. They're not out to get you. I mean, that's something I would hear from my students, when we would do the debrief after the jury. It's something I would hear from my buddies in school back when we were in school together. They hated me. They're out to, no, they just met you. They don't care. Yes, there's always the occasional weirdo or meanie in the jury. But as I said, they're usually offset by other jurors who balance that out.
And if we go back to number 2, where we don't take it so personal, then it's easier to trust.
Right. And so I think if you go in with the mindset that they have good intentions and therefore you do as well, I think it'll also reflect in your body language and your face and even how you talk about things. So it ends up working out better for you that way.
And then number 6, we have body language. What do we have for that?
Well, body language, this is very important. So when I was in college, I was dating an actress. And she gave me these tips about body language that I never thought of before, and they really made a difference. And because I practiced in front of her, right? And I was standing like this, and she's like, "Don't cross your arms." Why? This is comfortable. Yeah, but you look like you're resisting. You're resisting or not listening.
Right.
And she said, "Widen your stance, open your legs, open your arms, open your face." Right. And if you do that, open arms, open face, open body language, you'll have an open heart and an open mind, and you'll be conveying to them that you're open to receiving their feedback. Remember, most of the information we receive is nonverbal, right? So they're looking at your body language and how you stand there and take it. One great tip that she gave me was when someone's giving you negative feedback, is to walk closer to them. Because the jurors are typically sitting and I'm standing. So I would walk closer to them and look down on them. And I would do this all the time. And they would kind of wrap it up quickly. But when they were giving me praise, I immediately took a step back and I kneeled down. So I was eye level with them. And I would just keep giving the praise, keep giving the praise. And so those body language
Do you do that with clients today?
I do it with everybody. Yeah, because it really works.
Yeah. And body language, as we've talked about before, it's going to, if you have good body language, it's going to help you in the workplace. It's going to help you in relationships. I mean, it says a lot about you. Who wants to be in a meeting in a conference room if somebody's there with their arms crossed? I don't want to be around that person.
Right.
All right. Number 7.
Number 7 is don't get defensive. And don't make it, and that includes not making excuses, right? When they say, "Yeah, your room's ceiling's too low," no, it isn't. I mean, that's not conducive to ideas. It's not conducive to hearing that you're listening to them, and it also shows that you're a little insecure about it. Defenses are usually a sure sign that you knew that was kind of off. Instead, take control of the conversation by admitting the mistakes that you just realized you've made. Where you say, "Oh yeah, I see that now. If I had raised the ceiling height, it could have enabled me to get more light in, and I could have done this," right? Don't be afraid to talk about ways that you could approach it better, that if you had it to do over again, you would do it differently because of what they just said. And that starts with being non-defensive about it.
It does. And if you're in a meeting with a client and they start, throwing out, what you would consider bad ideas, you're obviously not going to tell them those are terrible ideas. You do kind of what we just been talking about in this list, take them in, listen, repeat it back. You don't have to make any decisions about it, but, let them feel like they're part of the process. And then when you go back to the drawing board, you can, discard their idea or maybe, try and work it in or try and work something in. But But it all goes back to that, don't get defensive. Because clients are going to, as much as you think you just created the perfect floor plan, once you show it to them, you're going to realize it's not. I mean, just in houses, we'd usually start with 3 different plans, not attached to either one or any of the 3, take them in. And usually what we'd end up doing is pulling pieces from each one to create ultimately like this 4th plan that didn't exist before.
Right.
And then number 8.
Number 8 is that you can disagree. They're not gods. It's their opinion. You don't have to agree with everything the jury says or your critiquer says, but you do have to consider it. You do have to just take it in, mull it about in your mind and consider it, which is the beauty of taking notes, by the way, or recording it, so that way you can kind of process everything they said later. You can't just reject it outright just because, no, they're wrong. You have a right to disagree, but after you've given them the respect that they've given you.
Yeah, and if you do really the 8 things we just talked about, there's one more left, but if you do the 8 things that we just talked about, you'll enjoy the process more, and you'll actually look like a great person. Like, you'll look like confident. You might start to feel like, well, I'm weak because I'm kind of caving in, or I'm not defending myself, or I'm not making a stand. The way you react to all this criticism speaks volumes, I think, about how you are as a person, and people will sense that. Because it takes a mature person to do 1 through 8, to do them correctly. That's a mature person, and we're still working on that. You and I, just in life, you're always working on that stuff.
Yeah, any day now, get it right.
I know, right? One of these days I'll get it right. And then finally, number 9.
Number 9 is just a general mindset that you have of maybe it's a West Coast mindset, but one of gratitude, right? That you're there for the feedback, and you're grateful for their time and for the feedback that they gave you, and that will come through. And the gratitude could be as simple as just giving them a genuine thank you, because if you did steps 1 through 8 previously, you'll have benefited from the criticism, you'll have benefited from the feedback, and the gratitude should come naturally. It could be like, oh my God, I wish that I talked to you 2 weeks ago because I got so much out of this. You use the criticism as a learning experience, and that gratitude will flow.
And be mindful of people who do give you feedback, because it's always not easy to get. Like, if you have some product idea, a business idea, to get really good feedback from your friends is kind of hard, because then they have to look at the idea, they have to kind of get invested a little bit. But all of these apply to even something like that. Let's say you have some product you want to develop. You go to your friends and you present it to them. All of these 9 apply to sort of the feedback you get. In fact, I had a friend come to me. He had recently some weird live streaming 24/7 outdoor channel YouTube idea, like really strange. And it was half-baked. I mean, it wasn't even half-baked. But I was just asking him questions about, well, who's already doing it on YouTube? And, I don't know if I would want to watch a 24/7, somebody sitting around a campfire, like, real time. Like, I want to, But whatever criticism I gave him, he would always be defensive and come back with another reason or another reason why he's doing that. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. So after about 20 minutes, we were having dinner, I was like done. Like, I didn't even want to discuss it anymore, because he's not listening to anything I'm saying. Yeah,
you might as well bang your head against the wall at that point.
Exactly. So, all right, we're gonna actually wrap it up. We're a little over 30 minutes. Before we do, Eric, real quick, go through our 9 tips to handle criticism.
Step number 1 is to listen, whether you record it or take notes. Show that you're listening. Number 2 is to focus and remember that it's not about you, so you can't take it personally. Number 3 is use active listening. Repeat back what you just heard. Make sure you got it right. Number 4 is to feel free to engage. Ask questions. Talk about what you've already ruled out, and maybe that was a wrong decision. Number 5 is to trust. Assume that people are good and they have good intentions, and really that we're all there to benefit one another. Number 6 is be mindful of your body language. Open arms, open face leads to an open mind. Number 7, don't get defensive. Don't make excuses. You can control the conversation by admitting those mistakes that you just realized, or ways that you thought you could have approached it better. Number 8 is that, remember, you have the right to disagree. You don't have to agree with everything they said, but you do have to listen to it. And finally, number 9, practice gratitude. Let it ooze out of you, especially at the end when you're leaving, and say thank you and be sincere about it. And if you've done steps 1 through 8, that should come naturally.
Alrighty, well said. Thank you, Eric, for joining us today. My name is David Doucette, and we will see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice, and pass.